Right, in this one what we're going to do is we're going to simulate lighting from an external source, i.e. the sky and sun, and because of their intensity, what we're also going to do is we're going to simulate color bounce onto this ground plane here. So if we just quickly render out this scene, we can quickly just break down exactly what we've got. So what we have is a number of materials. So just have a look at all of them. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different versions of the same material. So we've got the same kind of settings for each one. So we've got using a multi-layer shader, which gives us 2 specular highlights. Most materials, like for example, if you go to Blinn, we've only have 1 specular highlight as before. So if you look in here, only got the 1 specular level and glossiness value. In multi-layer shader, we've got multiple ones. We've got 2. So that gives us the option to create like a 2-pronged effect. One which is like a pinpoint specular highlight defined by this graph here, and the other one is going to be a lower intensity one but wider. So it looks like we've got 2 types of material. So we've got like a base coat, which is more like a matte effect, which is like this wider specular level here, and a glossy lacquer finish, which gives us this high pinpoint and intense specular highlight. This type of material is just assigned to each one of these boxes with a different color. So the only change is that the color has been changed for each one. That is literally it. So we've got a change in the diffuse color and also in the second specular layer color. The ground plane's obviously got like a basic grey material assigned to it without any specularity. Okay, so rendering this out, what we have is, you notice we've got a reflection on there as well, which again is set up pretty much as we've had before, with a basic fall off and a ray trace map in the side. So nothing overly spectacular, but it serves the purpose. Right, so what we need to do is, first off, we need to we're going to do this the opposite way to what we'd normally do. What we'd normally do is set up the actual external illumination and then set up the color bounce, but for this particular purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it the opposite way around, so we can see the color bounce construction in greater detail. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create an omni-light and position it within the center of each box, tint it accordingly, and have like a wide fall off, a narrow fall off, so we get like a bit of shadow cast, a bit of light casting on the ground. Now, because each one of these lights is going to be situated in each one of these boxes, what we need to do is to exclude each box from its own light. Otherwise, we're going to have like a kind of internal lighting effect, which we don't obviously want. It's going to look like each one has got a light situated inside, which it will do, but we don't want to give that effect away. So what we'll do first is let's just create an omni light. I'm just going to turn off snap to start with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to label this, because we're going to have several lights in here, so we need to label each one. So let's call that Omni Red. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the properties for each one. So first off, because it's a red box, we need to grab the red color, and let's just drop that in there. And then what we can do is, just by using the align tool, click on that, press H or click on select by name, and then we want to position it using the pivot point, which is basically set to the center of each box. Okay, so that's got our light in situ. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set this up for a single light, and then we can basically copy this around for the rest of our light. So we'll just design this for one single light to start with. So let's just render this out. You'll notice straight away it looks like we've actually got this box internally illuminated. So first off, what we need to do is we need to exclude the light. So let's exclude box red, render that out again, and the internal bits of this particular light aren't illuminated anymore, but the rest of them are. Reason being is because we don't have shadows enabled. So let's enable shadow maps, render that out again, and we've got like a more natural kind of effect. Now what we don't have is any attenuation. This fall off here is just basically because the light is in close proximity with the ground. So what we want to do is we want to use attenuation. So we'll start it at 100%, about where the boundary of the box is. So this is basically where the 100% intensity of the light, because we've got no ramping up in near attenuation. So this is basically the equivalent distance value where this multiplier is at full strength, and this is where the multiplier value is at 0. So we need to set the list so that's to about there. Okay, then let's render that out again. So we've got like a bit of a shadow, we've got a bit of a cast across there. Let's just extend that out a bit. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll maybe drop this value down a touch as well. So we've got a little bit of illumination cast across there. Now what we can do obviously afterwards is if this value is too high, we can go through and just tweak these values afterwards, just by, instead of actually going through and having to select each single one, we can just go to the light lister and we can just tweak this value accordingly. So that's okay. The shadow map value is a little bit too high, so again, bring the bias in so that it's tight to the edge of the object, and we can just drop this right down. We don't need it that high. Let's just put it to 128, and we'll have the sample range as is, so it's now quite blurry. So it renders out a lot faster and uses less memory. So with that in, what we can do now is we can go through and we can do it for the next one. So let's, the next one in our list, let's have a look. Next one's yellow, so let's do that on the yellow. And this time we're obviously copying it, we're not instancing it, because as soon as we actually change any parameters, like for example this color, it would do it to the other light as well. So on the yellow, we need to do it again for green. I'm not aligning them yet, I'll do that in a second. Again, copy the color across. Next one would be on the blue. If again I'm working too fast, then obviously pause the tutorial and catch up accordingly. On the white is the next one, and obviously we just copy that across as well. So next thing we need to do is just align these guys to their relevant boxes. So next one that we need to do is obviously let's do Omni Blue first, because it's first in the list. Need to align that with box blue, and then the next one is Omni Green. Need to align that with box green. Oh, sugar, wrong one. Box green. Just don't tell if I get it right. Box green. Right. Thank you. Next one. Yep, because we've already done red, so Omni White, and then we'll align that to box white. And the last one, Omni Yellow, align that to box yellow. Right, so we've got all these guys in situ. Now, one thing that we haven't done is we haven't excluded the relevant box to the relevant light, so we need to go through and do that now. So the first thing, Omni Blue, take that out, box blue in. Omni Green, take that out, box green in. Done red, let's do white now, and the last one is Omni Yellow, box yellow, take that out. Okay, so what we have when we render is just a basic kind of color cast for each one, casted onto the ground and onto their adjacent boxes. It's not very visible, so let's just increase that render frame size, so we've got a rough idea of how it's gonna look. Now, like I say, if they are too strong when it actually comes to the final render, we can obviously just go into here and just dial these settings down, which won't take very long at all. Okay, next thing we need to do, I'm just going to create a camera at that particular point. So in the viewport, I'm just going to hold down Control and press C, which basically creates a camera from the current perspective viewport with the right settings. So I can then just switch to the front viewport, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually just go to the top. I'm going to go through and I'm going to create a large hemispherical array of lights. So they're basically all pointing in like this at our number of boxes, so we get kind of like a nice diffused shadow around the edges. That diffused shadow is obviously going to be set up within the actual light's shadow map properties, so we get a nice confined shadow around the edges, but it also dithers off around as well. We're also going to use a more stronger light to simulate the sun as well, which we'll do afterwards. So let's get those lights in for the sky to start with. Now for this, I'm using a target direct. Reason being is because it's easiest to control, and it also creates nice linear shadows as well, which we can feather and blur. So to get it right, so we get it all kind of even, what we need to do is we need to have grid snap on. So right clicking on that brings up this grid and snap settings box. So we need to enable grid points, and then let's just drag one out so that it's about how many units have we got it away. Let's have a look. 3000 centimeters it's set away, and then the target is pointed directly in the center. Okay, next thing we need to do is we'll copy this, so holding down shift, drag that across and down so it's exactly 90 degrees, the right distance away, so it's the same distance in the x-axis as it is translated in the y. So, and what we need to do is let's label this first. Let's call it direct sky 01, and let's do that again. So 3000 instance it, so we change one, we change the others. Again, not worrying about the settings right now, we can basically worry about that. It's using the last settings that we used, so we'll sort that out shortly. So let's just do that at another 90 degrees, and let's do that at another 90 degrees as well. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to create a ring of these guys around here. So to do that, what I'm going to do is just go to the light lister, check off this, and then recheck it, and it selects all of the lights within that that group of instances. So I've got all these selected now. I'm going to turn off grid snap, because otherwise if I rotate, it's going to rotate around this snap point like that, which isn't right. So I need to turn that off. Still keeping angle snap on, which I've got currently set to an angle snap of 5 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down shift and then rotate 45 degrees, let go, and instance that. So that gives us a slight ring of lights. Now that might be enough, it might not be enough. We'll have a look in a second about that, because we might get too much banding. So what we might need to do is increase the amount of lights, so we stick one there, one there, one there, one there, and so on around. So again, back in light lister, uncheck that, recheck it, so we've got all of them selected. Ooh, is that right? I don't think we actually copied those. Let's just bring that back up. That's the reason why we had light lister up and we hadn't refreshed it. So let's just refresh that. There we go. Now we've got them all. That's right. Okay. Next thing we need to do is, because these guys are all sitting at the ground level, we need to raise them up, otherwise we're not going to get any illumination on the ground at all from these particular ones. So we need to raise them up a touch, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to instance them another couple of times, so we get two rings of it, and then by using the local axis I can basically go around and just bring that in and raise it up. So we get like a dome effect going on there. Okay, so next thing, let's go back to our camera. I'm going to close this and I'm going to enable shadow maps, and then let's just set up our shadow parameters. Now I think that a value of 256 should be relatively okay, and we need to have it relatively blurry, so I'm going to put a value of 10 in there. Now this multiplier value is going to be way too high, so for starters let's change the color so it looks more like the sky. So let's have a bit of blue, drop the green down a bit, so we've got this kind of like cyan effect. I'm going to render that out. Now there's two things that we'll notice straight away. Firstly is that we've got, where is it? Let's just turn off attenuation, show. Right. First thing is that our hotspot beam is a little bit too narrow. So the hotspot beam obviously is basically telling us where our shadows are going to be confined. So let's make sure that's increased. So we'll see that straight away expanding out. Best way to do this is if we actually look through one of the lights, so we can see exactly, I'll turn grid off, we can see exactly what area our light is going to cover. So this is a little good tip, is that if you're actually unsure what your shadow is going to see, it's always good to actually have a look through the lights to see what you're actually going to get. So we don't need to worry about the fall off the internal hotspot beam. So you'll see this internal part here, that's basically where our multiplier is at full strength, and that's obviously where it's the throw is down to 0. So we obviously want to get that close to, using as much area as possible for our boxes. So we can actually just tighten that off a little bit. Let's just bring that a bit closer, obviously checking other lights just to make sure that we've still got anything. That's almost clipping the top, but that should be okay. Now if we render that out, what we'll notice is that what we have for starters, two things. One, the light's too intense. Secondly, we don't have enough lights in here because we've got this kind of like banter effect. And thirdly, the internal environment isn't illuminated. So first things first, let's turn on overshoot, and you'll see in the viewport, there you go, straight away we've got the external bit illuminated. So let's render that out. And what this has basically done is, as mentioned in the initial introduction, is that all our shadows are going to be confined to this internal part, and the external illumination is going to be the external areas outside of the fall off is just going to be light. It's not going to be any shadows in there whatsoever. Now the reason it's all being blown out is because the multiplier value is way too high, because we've got a numerous amount of lights in there. So let's go and dial that down to 0.0, let's put 0.02, so you can see straight away that's actually had an effect. And we'll render that out. Now we'll see that obviously we've got like a bit of a throw, sorry, we've got a bit of a banding problem around here at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and top viewport again using the light lister, and deselect them, reselect it, so we've got all our lights. And because our snap value is currently set to 5, we need to drop that down to 2.5 so I can rotate using a value of 22.5, which is obviously half of 45 degrees. So that obviously puts lights where we need them. So if I now go back into our camera view, render that out, because we've increased the lights, render time's obviously gone up a touch, but the banding has now been reduced quite considerably. Also, the actual light intensity has gone up. It's roughly about the right kind of intensity that we want at the moment. Still got a bit of blotchiness around there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that up to 20. Render that out again. This is a lot of times that you'll actually spend playing with light settings to try and mix and match and erase any problems. So the banding's virtually about gone. It's slightly there still, but we can get away with that with either dropping the shadow map size and or increasing the sample range. Last thing we need to do really, apart from maybe drop these light intensities down, we'll actually see what that looks like once we actually get our main sunlight in. So let's just do that now. So it's just what we can do is we can just take one of these lights and then we can copy it out. So let's copy that, not instant 6, we need to change its value, so let's call that direct sun. And then what we can do is let's just change its color so it's more of an orangey type color, and then increase its multiplier value to 1, and I'm going to increase its shadow map size. Let's put that to 1024, and I'm going to put a sample range of 4 on it so it's nice and crisp and nice and detailed. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick it on the piss slightly so it's a slight angle. It's an angle to our camera, so we get a shadow that's kind of coming across here and not going to be directly in the same direction as the camera. So let's render that out and let's see how that looks. Now that looks roughly about right. Now we can see that because we've actually put the sunlight in that, it's blown out some of the shadows, so that's okay. It's got rid of any of the banding problems, which is good as well. And we've also got the right amount of color bounce, judging by eye anyway, on the floor. So that roughly is about it for our tutorial. Now what we can do to simulate this, I mean, going back to our original introduction to the lights, what we've literally done with this skylight setup is, if I just save this out, so tutorial color bleeding, let's call that finished. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through and I'm just going to turn off all the direct skies, and I'm going to turn off all the bounce lights. So the only thing that we have within the scene is the sun. So going through and I'm going to show last rendering. I'm going to duplicate that. So that's our original. So this is our original one, and this is what we're going to render at now. So we literally have, let's just go back into that, make sure that that is all turned off. So the only thing that we have is the sun. So we have overshoot enabled on the sun and just the shadows cast within that particular area. So that's right. So we've got very, very dark areas and no bounce lighting or anything like that. So to what we have within Max, what we've simulated with this like large array of lights around the boxes, is we've got in essence one of these, single click skylight. So if I render that out, we need to drop the settings down for starters, so let's quickly do that. I'm just going to cancel that render. I'm going to drop this down to, let's say, 0.5. Obviously we don't have any shadows yet for this particular skylight, so if we compare that at the moment, one thing to obviously note is that this area is obviously darker in here at the moment. The reason being is because we don't actually have shadows enabled on this skylight. So if I turn this on and then click render, let's see how long it actually takes. And I think, to be perfectly honest, it's going to take a little while. We've only just started rendering off that top bit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that down to 10. And I think, to be honest, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to drop this render frame size down to 320 as well. Okay, so what we have is the same kind of external sky illumination using the skylight. So the skylight is handy to use for some instances. It may be slightly a bit on the dark side, so I'm going to just increase its value a touch to 0.75. Render that out again. Let's have another look. So that's roughly what we've got by setting up our own lights manually. Now, the main difference between doing our manual effect and also the main difference between the automatic one with the skylight and our manual one is two things. One is that you can get, depending on whether or not you lower, let's just wait for this to finish. If you lower these rays per sample too low, you'll get some kind of pixelated effect. You can just about see it around here. You get some kind of pixelated effect where the amount of rays has obviously been reduced, so you get some kind of compromise there in quality. But one thing we don't have is a color bounce around the base here. Now, the only way to do that automatically is if you go into advanced lighting and into light tracer. Now, what light tracer does is it basically takes these rays which are scattered from this skylight. You notice that cache shaders have now been disabled since we had light tracer on, because it's got its own rays per sample in there. So by default, it's got a value of 250. This basically just increases the intensity per object, or globally. Intensity per the skylights, how intense we want the skylights might be, if we want any increased color bleeding, how detailed we want, if the render's coming out too pixelated, well, obviously we need to increase that, or if we can get away with reducing it. Normally in a preview you do it down to about 50. Filter size is how blurry you want the pixels to blur together. Ray bias, again as before, distance from shadow from object. And how many bounces on. Now this is the key thing that we're looking at here to basically simulate this kind of effect around the base. So if we basically drop in one bounce in there and click render, let's see exactly how long this takes to render out. Now it's basically scooted all the way down through there pretty quick, and then it's got to here and it's almost kind of ground to a halt. So what it's doing now, it's calculating the rays coming off the boxes and bouncing onto adjacent surfaces, so it gets some color cast. And because we've actually got the light bouncers now, we are now getting some kind of illumination within these surfaces, off this surface and onto here. So therefore this, if you notice, this is lighter now than this darker area down here. So we are starting to get some color bleed, but not a great deal. So to improve that and increase, we're getting a little bit of color cast around here, around the base edges here. It's more prominent where the sunlight directly hits our red boxes. Red box and yellow box. So once we actually get down to the render, but you notice the actual increase in render. So there we go, we've got a little bit of red around the base here, but you do notice straight away is the increase in render times. So bear in mind that using light tracer may yield a nicer result in the long scheme of things. It does take a lot longer to do. So therefore this is pretty much a basic scene. Okay, it's basic for, for educational purposes, but at the end of the day, when you're actually using this in production for either point of sale or internal lighting or external lighting situations, you are going to have a hell of a lot more objects in there, and it is going to take a lot longer to actually render. Now there are obviously some other renderers out there, like for example V-Ray, Metal Ray, Final Render and what have you, which actually do the similar kind of thing using their own proprietary tools, their own skylights, their own lights. They will do it a lot faster. V-Ray in particular is very, very good for this. But obviously, if you can get around using the standard kit, then to produce the same kind of result, then obviously that would be more advisable and also cost effective. So for that, I think that's roughly about it. I will quickly save this particular scene out as well, so let's call that tutorial color blending finished light tracer, so you've got that as well, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.